Um, my name is Dr. Stephen Waterhouse, also known as Seven. I'm co-founder and CEO of Orchid Labs, and I'm going to be talking today about our project and issues around surveillance, capitalism, and privacy, especially in today's environment. I want to say a big thanks to the team at Ethereal in these strange times, and whilst I'd much rather be on stage and seeing you all in person, I'm excited to be here and chatting to you today. So I've been doing this internet thing for quite a while. I think I had my first email address in 1989, and been involved in many of the different waves of it. When we first started around working on applications in this space, it was really a place where we could sort of feel very free, kind of like a global village, and very much decentralized by design. And this really changed over the decades that applications have been built, and this thing has really gone out to scale to billions of people. And really to use the internet today is very much to take a risk. You have to, many people feel like, you know, they're just really not sure exactly what risk they're taking. And in particular today, with the current situation around the COVID-19, we see even more tendencies around this concept of tracking and surveillance. And the many people working from home now, we're seeing a lot of changes, really almost like an acceleration of history. News stories today are really just full of, if you're tracking this stuff, you don't even need to be a privacy advocate to be conscious of what's happening. We're seeing calls for digital contact tracing, and these obviously are mostly meant in the best intentions. We're seeing people calling for increased surveillance, and we see that in terms of in many situations where we have a crisis, kind of going back to other crises that we've seen. We've often seen calls for increased surveillance, and the real challenge here is how do we balance these calls for surveillance with thinking about what the world looks like past the current peak of the crisis, and what are we giving up, and how do we make sure that when we make these trade-offs, we don't fall into a situation where we really can't turn back. Some examples of this, the sort of, there has been initially a lot of criticism of China over the censorship of this situation in the early days of COVID-19. In particular, the doctor who originally found it was and discovered cases of it was heavily censored. He unfortunately died a couple of months ago of COVID-19. And even in countries like Germany, which is one of the strongest bastions of freedom digitally, they've recently called to repeal parts of the GDPR in the face of epidemics. And the challenge of that situation, of course, is that whilst I have faith in Angela Merkel to kind of uphold some of these values, we may see a different leader of Germany in the future. And if they have the ability to define an epidemic as the situation that they can repeal certain aspects of privacy, we may see different outcomes than some of us want. So just talking like globally, we have very different kinds of surveillance, kinds of censorship globally. We're all probably quite familiar in the news and thinking about the very broad set of provisions that are enacted in China under the generalized name of the Great Firewall. It's actually a number of different technologies that are used there for censorship and surveillance. In Europe, GDPR is pretty well known in terms of a set of government rules about what kind of privacy, what kind of tracking you're allowed to do, what kind of tracking you're not allowed to do. What's a little bit less well understood is just how restrictive this makes application development, and also just exactly how difficult some of these things are actually to implement. And in the US, the sort of corporate control and surveillance, and more generally globally, the business model around surveillance capitalism, I think is something that we've seen many headlines around over the years. I think today, as I was saying, the defending this concept of freedom is really much more important than ever. Examples of repressive regimes turning to national emergencies. One great example is Egypt, which has been in a state of emergency really for the last 50 years. And during this time, opposition parties have been banned, elections have been cancelled, media has been censored. So I think asking yourself the question as to how long do you really believe this current state of emergency is going to keep going for? The news is full of stories about when it might end and how it might end, but I think until we have a vaccine, until we have proper treatments, we should imagine that we're going to be in some kind of state of emergency going forwards. And what does that mean for us? What does that mean for surveillance? What does that mean for privacy? Going back to 9/11, the US Congress very rapidly passed the USA Patriot Act. This allowed for many things: indefinite detention of immigrants, and expanded federal agencies' ability to wiretap citizens. I'm concerned about what the COVID equivalent of these kinds of laws are, and exactly when and if they would ever be repealed. I think there's every reason to believe that this kind of safety in exchange for freedom bargain is going to expand in the wake of this pandemic. And as a great sort of narrative twist here, many people are praising China's authoritarian response now, which appears to have stopped the spread of disease, if we can actually believe the numbers coming out of China currently. And many people in the West are now arguing that democratic governments need to really adopt these sort of severe restrictions on behavior, which includes widespread surveillance, police checkpoints. And I'm really concerned that this global pandemic pushes us past a tipping point in which we find our privacy impossible to regain. And many people who would otherwise have been on the side of privacy are now arguing that if the choice is between surveillance and privacy, we have to choose surveillance in order to combat the coronavirus. There's a number of techniques being developed now, including the coalition between Apple and Google, and some of these approaches are I believe, are well intentioned and do have the capability to anonymize aspects of information that's being shared. The challenge there, of course, is that the effectiveness of these approaches is going to be potentially weaker than other approaches, like much more strict surveillance, much more strict censorship potentially, than otherwise. So there's going to be like a real battle here, I believe, between how we think about life over kind of the next 20, 30 years, if we are in the world of increasing respiratory disease and epidemics. So the paradox here is that the tech that's made things easier, more fun, exciting, like made the ability for us even to work from home and so on, things, the advantages that we have right now, has also made surveillance and censorship much easier. And I think that, kind of one of the obvious examples here is Facebook. Yes, it's free, but there's always this catch. And these kind of business models that we talk about, this concept of surveillance capitalism, was a very, very good book written about this. I think are actually making us realize that this concept of free is actually very costly. And so what are we gonna do here? So we don't really want to trade off all these things always. We live in, we are a social species, and I think that today especially we're realizing that being social, interacting, connection is even more important. These are agencies that are central to human nature. But how do we have these things and really live our life in these societies that's becoming increasingly virtual? The data is also out there. 3 years ago when we started Orchid, which is very focused on privacy, we got a lot of pushback from people saying, do you really think this privacy thing is that big a deal? I worked in the early 2000s, I worked at Sun Microsystems. Scott McNealy had a great quote where he said, privacy is dead, you just need to get over it. And over the last few years, we've started to see, I think originally, really Edward Snowden's disclosures made people start waking up to this issue. And then in the wake of the last election in the United States, where people really woke up to the idea that the filter bubbles and the ad tech, which were potentially giving people things that they wanted, giving you the ads that you're really looking for online by tracking you everywhere. And you can argue that these are, good things in a capitalist society, although incredibly intrusive in many ways also, can also be translated into propaganda. This is a bit of a surprise to me personally, because growing up in the UK, where the media is so toxic that you have to really, when you grow up there, really have to learn to get your data from multiple sources, and just not trust anything you read until you've really had a chance to fact check it and understand it. This was really, and it's just sort of the history of propaganda for many years, centuries even, it's gone into a massive kind of outsized scale with the internet. I think that the challenge here is now that now that we've had the movie about this, now that we've had the Senate hearings, now that we believe that it's all okay because Cambridge Analytica is gone, I think the weakness of this idea is that I believe that for every Cambridge Analytica, there are another 10 or 20 companies, maybe more, that are going to be involved in an election near you soon. And this problem really hasn't gone away. I think one of the interesting things we have with the technology that many of us in the audience here are working on or aware of is around the decentralized architectures that we're building. The original design of the internet, as I was mentioning earlier, was very decentralized. However, the first wave of technologies in say the internet.com days, and then following that with the explosion in social and mobile, has been predicated upon a client-server architecture where it's really a single entity, even though that entity may have distributed resources in their data centers. They are building things using that particular architecture. Since, even though we've had decentralized architectures which have been widespread since, say, the days of Napster and other file sharing and things like BitTorrent, these things really came to the fore and into a lot of awareness with the emergence of Bitcoin, and then in particular Ethereum, which allowed us to build decentralized programmable environments. So the question we posed ourselves 3 years ago when we started was, what if we could build something in a more decentralized way? What if we could use these decentralized technologies to shift the model around privacy and surveillance? And it turns out that there are some existing strong privacy solutions, something that's grown in usage significantly over the last few years, and actually even more significantly in the last few months, is the use of virtual private networks, or VPNs. So what a VPN is doing, there's really two kinds of VPN technology, well, not architectures, but use cases here. One is, as was originally used, a VPN that allows you to tunnel into your company's systems behind a firewall. And this is in the model, some of you may still use this. This is in the model where all the resources in your corporate environment were behind a firewall. This is when all your file storage was there, when just even the ability to use the email that was in the corporation was there. As we all are probably aware now, these resources have really shifted to the cloud now. So instead of a VPN that needs to tunnel into a corporate firewall, what you have is your mail is probably on a server that you can access over the open internet, and also your documents. And these are protected using different kinds of encryption, different kinds of protection, but most likely not using a VPN, except for certain large companies. So instead, VPNs have been used by consumers. And what the consumers are doing is saying, I want to be able to access content, and I need to do it in a way where my IP address looks different. So what's happening is that people in web servers and internet resources in different that you're trying to access are trying to filter your content that you're allowed to access based on your IP address. And there's a couple of interesting examples here. One example is inside high schools. So in the US and probably in other countries also, I'm not sure, but in the US, there are firewalls inside campuses. If you're connected to the Wi-Fi in those campuses, which is probably a good idea because the cell phone coverage is probably saturated, then there is filtering on the addresses that you're allowed to go to. So you're not allowed to access Snapchat, you're not allowed to access Instagram, for example. And then on a larger scale, this is done in China. The Great Firewall currently filters 60 to 7% of the internet using firewalls. In addition, the challenge of exposing your IP address is that it's pretty easy using IP address to track where you are and in the end, who you are. So the VPNs have these two uses. One is preventing censorship and one is preventing surveillance. So what's up with VPNs? Well, turns out there's some challenges here also. So you've gone from having to trust the ISP or the person who's giving you your internet connection to now trusting a single entity, which is a VPN. So again, they're a centralized single entity. So you have to trust that VPN. You have to make sure that the VPN actually does throw away your logs or not log you. And you have to trust the fact that they're just good people. So we're all very familiar with the concepts of decentralization, not trusting banks, not trusting governments, and building systems around this like Bitcoin and Ethereum to do that. So our idea with Orchid was, how can we build a better privacy solution using decentralization? So we built this. We built, essentially, it's an open source privacy solution built on Ethereum. It incorporates many aspects of existing technologies in VPNs. And it allows you to essentially think of it as like a meta VPN. It's sometimes we talk about it as a VPN app that you thought you were buying. So what I mean by that is that instead of a VPN that's actually tracking you and logging you and potentially selling your data, we're giving you one that's actually private, one that's designed to be, from the beginning, completely private. The kind of ideas that we've integrated here, first of all, instead of just having one hop, as we call it, or one node or one set of nodes in the VPN connection, we allow you to string together multiple nodes. So the advantages of this is called onion routing and is used in, for example, projects like Tor. The advantage of this is that now none of the nodes in the network know both pieces of information about who you are and where you're going. The second thing we've done is change the payment model. So instead of the user subscribing to Orchid or to a particular VPN provider, what they're doing is they're paying for bandwidth as they use it. That's an interesting switch that we've made. And secondly, they're paying that's a series of nodes that are routing their traffic, and they're paying using a cryptocurrency, OXT, which is a ERC20 token that we've released with the network. The providers of the network are paid in this OXT in return for the bandwidth and the routing that they're giving. So in this system, we can have, first of all, hundreds or thousands of nodes or more in the network. So your connection could be routed through any one of many, many different providers. Secondly, it opens the network up such that instead of just a VPN that you've found already or somebody that someone chooses, the system can theoretically allow anybody to run a connection and be part of the network. And so many of you are familiar with Ethereum, and one of the questions you might be asking yourself is, well, how do you pay for this? So there's a number of different approaches that people have pushed out. There are other distributed VPNs that have been proposed. And usually the model is something like you connect to a node and set up a contract where you say, you give me some bandwidth, and in the future, I'll give you some payment. Or you could flip it around and say, I'm going to give you some payment first, and you give me some bandwidth, and I'll just have to trust you. There's some challenges with this, which is that in either of those two scenarios I just described, either party can just walk away, either without paying or without providing the bandwidth. So the ideal scenario is that you want to put in the payments with every single packet. And when I say packet, I really mean packet, like a small internet packet of data. So in order to do this, and this is what Orchid does, so in order to do this, you need to make these payments such that they're not costing a huge amount in terms of gas, and they're not clogging up the network. So the approach that we built, and this animation you can see here, is the idea of a winning lottery ticket. This purple ticket in the middle is one of hundreds of thousands of tickets that are actually going to win. The rest of these tickets are worth nothing. And these tickets or nanopayments are the currency of the network inside Orchid. And the providers are constantly checking these tickets to see which one of them has won. And the one that wins is going to grab essentially the big pot of OXT that's available on an expected basis over time. The expected amount is equivalent to what would have been paid for any one of the connections. As I was mentioning, we have multiple hops in this architecture. This is something that some VPN companies have offered, but instead of, it's a little challenging when VPN company is offering multiple hops that it's still inside the same VPN company, because effectively you're not getting any increased protection. You still have to trust that VPN. In our system, the traffic is hopping between multiple VPN providers, and you can configure as many hops as you want, and really is one of the most interesting aspects of the network level privacy. It's really, another way to think about this is a bandwidth marketplace. This kind of concept of us being a meta VPN or a meta service provider. There's many other things that we've looked at within the system. We've been focused very heavily on privacy and VPNs, but there are other things you could do with this network. I think of it about as a service network. And this kind of payments technology and other aspects we built into the smart contract design really offer many interesting advantages over existing service network architectures that we've seen so far. In order to launch this, we partnered with existing VPNs. This is an interesting kind of example of how we're both disrupting but engaging existing marketplaces. We chose VPNs that, based on relationships and discussions with them and understanding these guys, we believe these guys have the same kind of values that we do in terms of privacy and logging and other aspects. They're also, the advantage here is also that when we launch the network, we have very fast, low latency architecture because these guys are extremely good at running this kind of technology. the way that the application chooses where to send traffic to, and then initially it is with the small set of initial group of VPNs that we've chosen, is actually using a smart contract. This is a curator, we call it a curator smart contract. The technology allows for anybody to customize this curator. So any of you in the audience could say, okay, well, actually, I don't want to use these initial node providers. I want to set up my own servers and also set up my own curator. And for example, something like geographic geolocating, which is a common feature in many VPNs, it's something we're going to be integrating soon, can be easily added to Orchid using curators that are localized to specific geographies. So you could have a curator that has only nodes in, say, the UK, so that I can watch the BBC. And you'd have another one where the curator has nodes that are only focused into China. Let's say you wanted to really port into the Chinese, behind the Chinese firewall rather than the other way around. These kind of things are easily done using our architecture. We launched in late 2019. Initially partnered with Coinbase. We're on Coinbase Pro, Coinbase Consumer. We do a Coinbase Earn campaign also. Following that, we launched more globally. So we're now trading with OKEx and Bittrex Global. And then in the last couple of days, we launched with Gemini. We're speaking with Tyler and Cameron later today. Actually, if you want to tune in, take a break from Ethereal. And also our friends at CoinList. When we launch on these exchanges, obviously there is always interesting for us to find partners like this globally and give people access around the world to OXT, which enables them to use the application. We also translate, so we consider all of these launches as ways to engage users. And so we've been translated to Mandarin, Russian, Japanese, Malaysian, Korean, and we'll continue to do this to make sure applications and content are easy to consume globally. And it's available now. So we have applications on Google and Apple, iOS. There's a command line version for OS X, and there'll be a number of new applications coming soon. You can get in touch with us at any of these resources here. My email is also very easy to remember. It's just the number 7@orchid.com. And I'll be available for your questions after this.
Thanks, Evan. So we already have some great questions coming in, and I just want to let everyone know we have about 15 minutes for questions. So if you drop them in the Q&A, I'm just going to read them out live. So the first one is from Eamon. Thanks for asking this question, Eamon. His question is, while it is true that giving up your privacy may lead to a better, faster, and more efficient economics through tailored advertising, one of the growing concerns are using these methods as a means to gain political power. How do you see these technologies being used as a political tool in the coming days, especially with the increase of biometric tools as a way to measure an individual's biometric data? How can a decentralized model help tackle these issues?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So I think biometric data is something that's, I have a Garmin Phoenix watch, which I actually got during this current situation because I wanted to have better sleep data and working out data. And I think it's interesting for us to take a look at, for example, the privacy protections around their data or the privacy protections around Fitbit's data, and to the extent that those companies could be either sharing or being co-opted to share that information. The idea that something, I think there's this thermometer company that it's one of these business models that sounds like a terrible business idea initially, but now seems super relevant, which is this company tests your does your temperature checking and then stores it in the cloud. So they have anonymous aggregated data. I use those quotes because then there's no real such thing as anonymous aggregated data. unless you're really careful, that has been used to show how COVID-19 may have spread even earlier than we realized and being used to predict things. So I'm all in favor of concepts like distributed identities and owning your own data. We're in a crisis right now, so without these tools and technologies being available today, they're not going to get used. And I think this is why we see very few examples of currently blockchain technology being used or proposed in the contact tracing applications that are coming out. So yeah, I'd love to see these kinds of technologies being used in the future. Sort of the other part of the question was how can this data be used for political power? I think it already is, and it's already being used to nudge people. It's already being used to inform. And I think that one of the things that was pretty poorly understood about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica is that Facebook and Cambridge Analytica didn't actually, or Cambridge Analytica didn't use that much data, didn't use that many people, because all they needed was a small subset of a representative subset of the population. And then by using the connection graph of Facebook, they were very quickly able to figure out how to use propaganda to influence people. Hope that answers your question.
So our next question comes from Marco. Marco, thanks for asking this question. Do both ends of a communication need to have Orchid VPN enabled for maximum security? Or could just one use it? For example, calling one of the users calling from a totalitarian nation, and would essentially both be protected while talking with someone in a free country? Or does this only work to eliminate the man in the middle?
Yes, so the end web resource doesn't need to be running Orchid to make the connection private from IP level. However, you can imagine, and this is something in sort of extensions to how Orchid can be used. You can imagine that if a node is also running one of the Orchid, essentially Orchid node software, then instead of routing that connection to the open internet, it could serve some content from that node itself. And that would give you a different kind of protection and privacy.
So a question from Rex is Orchid available for PC or mobile? What's the cross-platform availability?
Yeah, so we went mobile first. We were launched on Android and iOS. It's currently just test flight in iOS. And then more recently, we've put it on command line OS X. We've got a desktop client that should be ready soon on OS X, and also Windows and Linux. So yeah, mobile first. The current pandemic situation has actually prompted us to accelerate our desktop plans, because initially our theory was mobile VPNs are just such a much larger use case in the normal world, but that started to shift recently, and with more people being stuck at home.
Great, thanks for that answer. A question from Luca. Thanks for asking this question, Luca. Can you please again explain, maybe add some details around why the specific OXT token is needed in the allocation, and how the privacy tool allocation mechanism works? And Luca would love to hear an example if you have one.
Okay, so questions as to why do we use OXT? So we use OXT there's a couple of uses of it. It's a payment mechanism. So clients pay using OXT, which is then effectively consumed in nanopayments. But the end result to the node provider is OXT. Node providers stake using OXT. The staking is essentially an advertisement. So the more bandwidth you've got, the more capabilities you've got, the more OXT you're going to want to stake there. And I didn't really understand the second part of the question, but yeah, maybe if you want to reframe it.
Yeah, let me, and I apologize, Luca, if I reframe this wrong from what you were asking. Feel free to hit the Q&A again. But how does the privacy tool allocation mechanism work?
Yeah, I don't understand what it means.
Okay.
Sorry.
Fair enough. Another question. As you were building essentially this, both a VPN and a crypto economic system, what are some of the things that you did to test your VPN, and then also the use of the micropayments?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of subtlety built into this system. We've done a lot of work to really hide the complexities of things like the economic design, the networking design from the end user. I'm not sure we've done we're trying to do a better job now of explaining to people in the community and developers as to what those subtleties are and the complexity that we've hidden, so that it's easier to understand and think through, and also how to extend this. So yeah, I guess it's just sort of more generalizations here, which is that we've got a team that focuses on adversarial game theory, network design within crypto economics, but also just thinking about any kind of adversary and what we're specifically protecting against. We looked at things like timing attacks. On the networking design, we switched away from using established VPN protocols and built something using WebRTC, which makes our traffic look more like the traffic we're using now, like Zoom. So far, even though we're banned in China in terms of like Orchid.com is not available, the tests that we've run and with people out there it's telling us that the client is working. It's also been working in countries like Dubai, cities like Dubai. So even though we haven't really focused on doing a big global expansion yet, some of these approaches seem to have been working out. And I apologize to anybody who's not getting their answers completely answered as challenging with the kind of slightly offline Q&A format. So happy to respond. If you have other questions, you can send them to us directly. You can jump into Telegram or get in touch with us. We're really happy to discuss these things at any point. And I'll be around for the rest of the day, so you can ping me directly.
Yeah, always good to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
But you're doing excellent, Seven. I think they're great ones. Well, there's more questions coming at you from Ian. When OXT is bought from an exchange that has already set up KYC, AML on it, protections on it, could you describe how privacy is preserved when using that OXT token for an individual's VPN?
Yeah, so it's one of the big challenges with using public blockchains and building something like this. So I think kind of without, there are a number of approaches people have pushed out for, and I think Vitalik's talked a lot about Tornado Cash and other kind of mixers. Mixers have challenges also, and there's sort of a mix of kind of like miscellaneous, not particularly good solutions to these kind of things. The nanopayments themselves actually give you some obfuscation and increased privacy over just say doing all the transactions on chain. And the reason for this is that there's just a small percentage of these transactions that actually end up on chain. So you could argue that there's some approaches, that some enhancements there. I think without kind of scooping something that we're working on, and without kind of using the classic coming soon phrase, there's some stuff we figured out that I think is gonna help us very soon. But yeah, we definitely are conscious of that particular attack vector, and I think that there's a wide variance in the applications of VPNs in terms of why people are using them, and in the case where you're using the kind of example you gave, there are some challenges there around using public blockchains.
Perfect. I think well, it's always good to tease some, always pay attention, everyone listening, because there's more to come, and that's really cool. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So we'll start with this one from Marco. What are the conditions to open a node and help Orchid network in supplying its service?
Yeah, there's no minimum staking, unlike other things. The amount that you stake is really up to you, up to the provider, but it's meant to be a reflection of the amount of bandwidth or capability that you've got. Really, kind of in more like a kind of a competitive capitalist advertising approach. The requirements as far as infrastructure. It currently runs on Linux, so you need to get that kind of environment together, and ideally, there's no minimum requirements around bandwidth or otherwise. But ideally, if you're going to be successful at providing bandwidth, you're going to want a connection that is got good bilateral bandwidth capabilities. A lot of the bandwidth inside home environments is asymmetric. In other words, your down speed is much higher than up. If you do speed tests, you can see this pretty quickly. Sometimes you may have hundreds of megabits down and then only a couple of megabits up. We often get asked the question as to, why aren't you making it just so that anyone in any home can run this thing? And they can, but the kind of network that you'd be supporting at that point would have incredibly bad latency and speeds. And we don't think that would be particularly effective for the real use cases that are out there. But we do recognize other use cases, other sort of more fringe use cases. For example, somebody who wants to build a custom circuit that's really run by a handful of people that they know and they trust, they can do that using our technology. And that could be running out of people's homes. It wouldn't be a network that millions of people would find useful to use because it would just get saturated incredibly rapidly. But it could be something that might be useful for somebody who has no other choice, but there's kind of a human rights angle as to why they need to build that kind of circuit, and our technology enables that also.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we are at time. We did have one more question, which I'll just, we continue the conversation afterwards, but Chris did want to hear your opinions on all the things that people should consider when trying to protect their privacy. So I think that's a great thing to, continue the conversation, obviously, on Twitter, on Telegram. But Seven, we'd just really like to thank you for participating, and what a wonderful presentation, and so happy to have you be part of Ethereal. Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for showing up and the great questions that we had.
Great. Thank you. I'll just, I'm going to put my Twitter handle in here, and kind of just drop us a line at any of these resources, and we're around. If you want to chat today, we'll be at a number of the sessions today, and look forward to virtually meeting you if I haven't met you already. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, and yeah, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Ethereal.